Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. I'm Ashish Malik. I work at the University of Edinburgh. I'm a council member of the British Society of Soil Science, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our third webinar of the year. Before I welcome our presenters, I would like to introduce the British Society of Soil Science as hosts for today's webinar. We are an established international membership organization and charity committed to study of soils in its widest aspects. We bring together those working within academia and have a growing membership amongst practitioners implementing soil science in industry and those with keen interest in soils. We plan to host 10 webinars during the year, so keep an eye out on our website for further details. Before we begin, just some basic housekeeping. As there are many of you here today, all your microphones have been muted. And we will be taking questions during and at the end of the presentations. So we'll be monitoring those throughout the webinar. Right. Please, could you submit any of your questions by 12:50 or so that it gives us time to go through as many of them as possible. Today's presentation has also been awarded CPD points. So if you're registered with us, please contact us directly after the event so that can be handled. Right. Also, just to note that today's presentation will be recorded. Right. So I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker for today, Professor Louise Archer. Louise will be speaking on supporting equitable outreach and participation in STEM. Louise is the Karl Mannheim Professor of Sociology of Education at UCL and co-chair of the Center for Sociology of Education and Equity. Her research interest seeks to understand educational identities and inequalities in relation to social class, gender, race, ethnicity across primary, secondary, higher, and informal learning contexts. She has authored over 100 academic publications and directed numerous large-scale national and international research studies. She's a fellow of the British Academy and the Academy of Social Sciences. She's particularly interested in participatory approaches, working with teachers, professionals, and young people in ways that can support more equitable education policies and practices. With that introduction, it's over to you, Louise. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to join you. I'm going to try and share my screen. And is that working?
Yes.
Fantastic. Perfect. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so yes, I'd like to talk about our research around supporting equitable participation in STEM. So why is equity a concern in STEM outreach? There are clearly enduring, very unequal patterns of participation in STEM. We see this from school through to higher education and informal STEM learning settings as well. There's been a lot of time and resource and effort put into trying to create more equitable STEM participation over the years. But arguably, we've seen quite slow change. And worryingly, in the past couple of years, there are also surveys like the Science Education Tracker, which are suggesting that actually STEM engagement is maybe even getting worse, particularly among young people, that it's, they're getting less engaged. We were to say that generally educators, whether they're in school or out of school, or they don't get a lot of resource, time and support to really understand and address the complexity of inequalities. And as a result, we do have this pattern when we've surveyed the sector, where STEM interventions tend to reach the already privileged. It's a case of kind of the rich get richer. And we would also say that being unaware of equity issues can really limit the impact of the outreach and engagement activities that you do as well. So we think it's something that's useful all round to be able to understand a bit more about. Anything to do with equality, diversity and inclusion, EDI at the moment as well, I think we do have to recognise that it's under attack currently. We have the rise of political populism. We've seen the impact of Trump defunding EDI in the US, the impact that it has on companies not just there, but in the UK, like companies like GSK have recently announced retreats from these sorts of areas. We know also there's this prevalence of toxic masculinity, sexism, and these issues around culture wars. So basically, I think equity work is in a difficult place at the moment. So our research tries to support how do we understand and address equity in STEM participation better. And I'm going to draw on a couple of studies that we've done. The first is the Aspires study. So this is a longitudinal study which was really trying to understand what are all the factors that make a difference to shaping whether a young person continues into STEM or not. It's funded by the ESRC and it's a long study. It started in 2009, it went on until 2023. And we tracked a cohort of young people from age 10 and followed them all the way up to around age 22, 23. We did this through mixed methods. We surveyed young people and we also conducted in-depth interviews repeatedly with them and their parents and carers across 6 time points. So you can see there, overall, we collected data from over 47,000 young people. We've done over 760 interviews at these different age points. And this kind of gives us a breadth and a depth of understanding of trying to see what are all the different factors that make a difference into one young person going into STEM and not another. If you're interested in finding out more, there were some links. There are a lot. I'm happy to share my slides, but there's links to the main reports. There's also subject-specific reports, and there'll be also a physics report coming out this summer. It's a long study. We've produced a lot of work. We've got over 44 academic publications, for example. So basically the point of this slide is just saying there's a lot of stuff on our website. There's sort of thematically grouped publications. If there's something you're interested in, have a look, it may be there. There's more than I can just cover in this presentation. But one of the key insights that this work gave us is the idea that actually it's not just a lack of interest, which is the issue with STEM participation. So when we looked across our data, here it shows each of the different coloured bars relates to different age groups on taking the surveys. We can see from that first grouping of columns that it's not that school science is not interesting young people. So you can see there example items where these are the percentage of young people agreeing that they learn interesting things in science. So the first blue one is when they're at the end of primary, age 10, 11. Continues through purple is GCSE year, and quite hard to keep anything interesting, arguably then. But even so, that's nearly at 60%. So teachers are doing a good job. The greyed out column in that first batch is just students who've chosen to take one or more science A-levels. Reassuringly, they've got high interest. But you can see overall, quite interested. They also have supportive parents. So you can see here again, really high support up until the end of year 11, age 15, 16. For example, their parents think it's important for them to learn science. That does drop off once it's no longer compulsory. It's also not that they've got really terrible stereotypical ideas of scientists. So you can see here, students are agreeing across the board, scientists do valuable work. They also agree with statements like scientists make a difference in the world, also that they earn a lot of money. Not all scientists agree. But on the whole, we've got all of these positive views here. But they don't translate into wanting to be a scientist or seeing it as a career for yourself in the future. So this last group of bars at the end here are just those who are agreeing that they'd like to be a scientist or use science in their work in the future. And you can see it's quite low. And we were surprised by this because given all of these very popular, positive views around science, why do so few see it as something being for them? And although it looks like it wiggles around a bit, it's actually statistically no difference from age 10 up to 18. And that surprised us given how strong the positive views were and the fact we kind of thought young children in particular might think the world's their oyster. When we looked at who within each of those bars was agreeing that they'd like to be a scientist, we found that over time, the profile was becoming narrower. It was becoming increasingly male, increasingly privileged. So again, it's telling us that all the things we're trying to do to encourage, for example, more girls into STEM, across race, ethnicity, social class, and so on, are not working as well as we might want them to be. So looking across all of this data, we found that there were three key factors, and the interplay of these really helped explain what it was that was making a difference to young people's STEM trajectories. And I'm going to briefly talk through these in turn, but we call them identity, capital, and field. And in a nutshell, the idea is that the closer you feel your identity aligns with a given STEM area or a STEM discipline, the more you have, quote unquote, the right sort of resources and capital to support your progression in that field, and the more the field allows you to continue, the more likely you are to go into STEM, and the converse is true. But I'm going to unpick those slightly now. So the first of those is the idea of sort of science or STEM identity. So it's that feeling that I'm a science person and that other people maybe see me as a science person or a physics person or a chemistry or a soil person. And we found that the extent of STEM identity that a young person have was significantly related to them taking a STEM degree at higher levels. But identity was also a mediating factor, and it could mediate a young person's participation even when they've got really high interest and they're really high attaining. So there's just a quote there from a young woman called Kate, who I interviewed. And when she was about 17, 18, I was asking her what she thought she might want to do at university. Now, Kate had taken sciences at A level, and she said, well, I've always liked physics, but always thought it was quite hard, so maybe not for me. Now, Kate was the highest achieving student in our sample. She had A stars across the board. Arguably, physics was not too hard for her, but there's issues around how we construct physics that make particular young people feel that they're not good enough. And these popular associations of STEM with cleverness and the idea of natural talent, so the idea that if you have to work hard, maybe you're not really the natural genius, the kind of Sheldon from Big Bang Theory idea, that these are really pernicious and can really interfere with young people's STEM identity and impact participation. And it happens a lot in maths and mathematical areas like physics. So that's identity. So identity then interacts with what we call your science or your STEM capital. And really this term just relates to all the science related and STEM related social and cultural resources that you might have. So you can think of it a bit like a bag, and that bag has pockets, so it encompasses what you know about STEM, how you think about it, your attitudes and dispositions, what you do. Do you do sort of outreach stuff in your spare time, informal activities? Who you know, are there people encouraging you, talking to you about science, and so on. And we found that the more science or STEM capital you have, statistically, the more likely you are to take it at A level and at degree level. So STEM capital really supports progression, but it's unevenly distributed. And where young people lacked science or STEM capital, it made their progression more precarious, even if they really like the subject and they're good at it. So as I said, science or STEM capital positively, significantly relates to you progressing in STEM, but the second bullet point there also shows that it's not just that it supports STEM progression generally, but actually it seems to be quite good for life outcomes anyhow. So young people who had high levels of science capital were also significantly more likely at age 21, 22 to have higher rates of active citizenship, feeling positive about the future, having higher job satisfaction, good health, feeling that schools have propelled them where, and so on. So we would argue that supporting young people's science or STEM capital is valuable irrespective of whether or not we're going into STEM. So that's identity and capital, and then the third area is what we call field. So in this context, we're particularly talking about the field of education. So schools, teachers, out of school learning settings can obviously make a big difference to how young people progress and how they their identity and their capital. But we find time and again that dominant cultures and practices in STEM fields make it actually really hard for young people to continue and to persist, even if they're interested and good at it. And we're particularly bad at this in England. We have all these systems of stratification set up, like we have double and triple science routes and so on. We also found that young people were telling us that they would, in addition to these kind of issues around the cleverness of STEM, would say, you know, my teacher told me you need a boy brain to study maths and physics and things like that. Statistically, we also found that boys and privileged boys were more likely to report being supported by teachers and other significant others to continue in STEM. And we found that students, particularly black students, would have very high levels of interest and aspiration, but were given a lot less support and had more hurdles to overcome to realising these. When we looked not only across schooling, but also into higher education as well, we really find there's this chilly climate in STEM where underrepresented communities are made to feel that they don't belong, and that even young people who've got quite a lot of home capital and interest, their parents are like really supporting them, this can be mitigated and negated by negative experiences, particularly in schools. In higher education, we found that peer sexism statistically negatively impacts women STEM students far more than women in non-STEM areas. And this is an area that needs addressing. It's not that the job is done once we get people into university. But what made a difference to young people's trajectories is where they had these what we call wraparounds of support over time and across context for their identities and their capital, and that these repeated longer-term informal experiences were much more powerful than one-off ones. So how do we translate those insights into how we might think about in outreach and engagement activities? So the second study I'm going to introduce is the Youth Equity and STEM study. This was a 4-year collaboration between us in the UK as researchers and colleagues in the US and partners in a range of informal STEM learning settings like science centres, zoos and so on. And this project developed a model which showed that equitable outcomes for young people, particularly those from underrepresented communities, can be supported through informal experiences, informal STEM learning experiences that are engaging but are grounded in what matters to young people and their communities. It's a concept that we call kind of grounded fun. So it's not just fun, but it's meaningful fun. It's fun that matters. Also where experiences value young people's identities and knowledges, what they bring with them. Where these experiences seek to increase young people's agency, self-worth and capital, not just their STEM knowledge. And where these experiences challenge dominant STEM representations, relations and ways of being and doing in STEM. So where they're broadening up what it means to do a form of STEM learning. We co-produced a range of resources with young people and practitioners in that study, and one of these we call the Equity Compass, and it's really just a reflective resource to help you. It also helps you ask questions of your practice, to help you sort of think in that equity mindset, to see you're going in the right direction, think of areas to work on, and you can plot your progress. And the idea is you don't want to be in the middle, you want to be moving ever outwards. There are lots of different versions. There are versions for the informal sector generally, for teachers, school leaders. There's a particular STEM ambassadors version here as well, if any of you are STEM ambassadors. And there's also a funders edition for policymakers and practitioners as well. There's also a free self-paced online course, 5-star reviews. There you go. But again, free to use. It's about sort of self-paced around 6 hours. Our partners who've used these approaches have said it's helped them to think in a more structured way, rather than just going on gut feeling or sort of making it up as you go along. It's helped them to deepen their practice, and when they've worked together in their organisations, as the quote says, it's completely changed the way they work. So those are good insights around how you kind of get the equity mindset. But in our most recent project called Making Spaces, we wanted to take this a step further and really get into the much more practical detail of what can people do in practice. So this is an international research and development project. We're working in this case with maker spaces in 5 countries. And again, we use participatory research, approaches with researchers, practitioners and youth. We've collected a range of data. And from this, we've produced, again, another set of resources, and this has got a kind of practical guidebook for practitioners. It's also got another self-paced online free course. And it's really also got these tools for how do you capture equitable outcomes from the work you do. And we're currently training a global network of accredited trainers to deliver this across in different settings, like in Africa and Asia, Europe, US, and so on. So I won't go into the detail of it, but just to give you a sense, it's called the 3-step approach, and it has 3 areas of how you prepare, do, and evaluate your practice in terms of equity. And I just wanted to give a few examples of how the practitioners in that study have been using the approach and the sorts of things they've been doing to support their own more equitable access and outreach work. So they've been doing things that you might imagine, looking at the language and representation in the materials they produce, auditing their language, looking at pronouns, imagery, the themes of what they're offering. They've looked at who is delivering their courses and their outreach in terms of the course leaders, participants, offering taster sessions. They look at where they conduct it. They choose more, for example, if those looking at gender have chosen more female-friendly settings, looking at the sort of content of the courses. And a lot of it has been working through collaborative relationships, so partnering with job centres, community groups, and so on. Again, they're working in different national contexts, so it's more or less relevant, but some of them have used quotas and targets to make sure they get a more diverse set of participants, not just those who sign up first. Some of them look at using dedicated offers like girls only and non-binary sessions. There's lots of work also with families, and again, particularly in some cultural international settings, this has been really important because there's been concerns around daughters taking place. And really, they're all trying to meet people where they're at and take the STEM outreach experience to the young people rather than trying to bring them to the experience. Alongside access and outreach, I think it's also really important that they're thinking about the governance in their settings and their organisations, so their staff, leadership, working hard to diversify these, bringing in youth voice, setting up youth boards, making sure that they've got a real role in governance, looking at role models and mentors, having a real say, not just being tokenistic and just doing the outreach stuff, but also part of governance. Looking at the diversity of role models and a critical take on role models and mentors, looking at this intersectionally and also looking at peer mentors as well. And then finally, alongside that, they're also looking at the pedagogy. So how do you do these outreach sessions? What's the sort of teaching and learning theory behind it and the ideas and the values behind it? So lots of work here, really trying to interrogate that taken for granted practice of what we normally do and thinking, well, how could it be not, how might it be excluding people, or it might be representing particular dominant or normative ideas. Meeting needs, levelling the playing field. This is trying to get beyond the rich get richer model. So some settings are always about providing food, travel, the cost, childcare, depending who they're working with. A real move away from recipe-based forms of engagement. So that's sort of like the amount of times I've seen people building marshmallow towers from spaghetti and things like that in engineering settings. It's really about making the STEM a vehicle and not a destination. So a vehicle to support people in their lives, whatever it is they want to do, not just about bringing people into STEM. And core to this is using what we call assets-based approaches. So valuing what people bring with them, supporting individual and community agency. And underpinning all of this is embedding what we call critical reflective practice. So constantly being open, reflecting on what you do, and really interrogating it through an equity lens. The people we've worked with, it hasn't been plain sailing. There's been hurdles and blocks. We often find resistance from some more privileged colleagues or communities, a slow pace of change. Some of the people we've worked with, particularly from more privileged backgrounds, have talked about it can be hard to make change stick, to go beyond business as usual, to go beyond what's comfortable, what I feel comfortable with. It's always been a challenge, and particularly in areas, there's been some sort of slow progress towards allyship. So sometimes it's always the same people who are related to those communities who step up to do the work. And actually we need it to be everyone's responsibility and everyone's to care about it. So as Sarah Ahmed says, in any sort of EDI work, there are lots of issues around what she calls non-performatives and brick walls. And this was a comment here as well. So just to finish up, I would suggest that if you're interested in extending the equitable potential of your access and outreach work, that maybe the 3 steps approach is something to look at, to consider if there are ideas there that may be of use to you and of interest, and that really just remembering that fostering young people's interest alone is not enough. We have to support their identity and their capital and change the field of what we're doing if it's going to make a difference. Again, we've got resources there like the Equity Compass, the 3-step approach. I'd really encourage critical professional reflection. It's been transformative amongst the practitioners that we've worked with. Key to that is embracing that discomfort in a productive way. And really, I think the goal is also working towards those longer term forms of engagement work, not just the one-offs, to allow even more impact from what we do. And I think if nothing else, just that real value of remembering just to stop and reflect on what we're doing, because it's always so busy. Everyone has such busy professional lives that there's always a value in a structured form of reflection. So there's some links there, but I'm going to stop there because I'm sure I'm out of time. So thank you very much, and I'll try and stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was fascinating in terms of outputs, but also so many great resources there. Just a reminder that we will be taking questions, but at the end of the second presentation. So if you have any questions, please submit them now via the question box. And please do that before 12:50 so we can go through them with the presenters. I would now like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Mark Nason. Mark is Head of Professional Practice at the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, and is also the chair of the Outreach Committee at the British Society of Soil Science. He has worked in education and research for over 20 years. At Bangor University, he completed a PhD in soil organic matter formation at post-industrial sites. He then did 2 postdoctoral research positions in plant physiology and soil construction for land restoration. After moving into further education, he qualified as a teacher and has worked for the Chichester and Cornwall College groups. In his earlier roles, he led the development of applied higher education courses at Eden Project Learning, teaching plant soil science to horticulture and ecology students, and maintaining a strong interest in soil construction and the development of soil processes during restoration. Um, Over to you, Mark. Looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Ashish. Sorry, that was quite a long introduction you gave you gave for me. I shouldn't have given you quite so much there. Yeah, I'm head of professional practice at the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, and in that role, I and my team are responsible for producing and making available the guidance that ecologists and environmental managers, including soil scientists, need to be able to achieve the best possible outcomes for nature. And we have a big focus on making sure that guidance is as far as we possibly can based on the best available evidence. So we talk about the need to improve evidence-based practice in ecology and environmental management. But I think, as Louise says, we need to have the opportunity to reflect on what we do in terms of outreach and engagement, and make sure that we're trying to engage in practice that is informed by evidence so that we can achieve more impact, really. So what I'd like to do is just talk about my experience of doing outreach, particularly for soil science, talk a little bit about the role of the British Society of Soil Sciences Outreach Committee, which I recently took the chair of. And then also talk a little bit about the Green Jobs for Nature initiative that we have running at SCIEM with BS Cubed, partnering on that too. So I first started to get involved in outreach and stakeholder engagement when I was doing my PhD and my research, and that was in soil construction for habitat restoration, and they were European Union life funded projects with that requirement to engage stakeholders. And I really enjoyed it. That was kind of my first experience really of having the opportunity to bring people to field sites or to go out to community groups and events and talk about the science that we were doing. And I wouldn't say that I had any knowledge of any kind of evidence-based approaches or reflected on how effective what we were doing was at that point. I was more about the nitrogen content in the soil forming materials that we were using and how to break the germination of heather seeds. But I did really enjoy it, and I think that was noticed. So I ended up being tasked with organising Bangor University's display for a couple of years at the Royal Welsh Showground. And colleagues know I've got a bit of a like for things that you can put your face through. So there's me as a tawny owl. And I think you see as we go through the rest of the slides, I kind of get fatter and bolder. But what we did at the Royal Welsh Showground was to the first year it was about growing tomatoes, and I was a bit underwhelmed with what we managed to do. So in the second year we actually moved a couple of tons of slate waste and created our own mini slate tip and planted it up with the different sorts of species that we were using and the different soil recipes, just to showcase the techniques that were being used up on the mountainside to a bit more of an accessible audience. And that was really good fun, really enjoyed that. And I then moved into teaching, and I found myself teaching A-levels and teaching applied sciences. And then ultimately I started to lead science departments and campuses. And there's a really big focus at that point on competing, which is something that Louise touched upon a little bit. I think if in further education and in higher education, if you can't get enough bums on seats, then you lose your job, you close courses. So a lot of outreach and engagement was really centered on people who were making decisions on which college course to do or where to go to university. So I did lots and lots of assemblies, lots of open days, but it was largely around competing for a relatively small number of people who had already made the decision that that was the sort of subject that they'd want to go in. And when I moved down to work for the Cornwall College group, we realised just by looking at the proportion of people in parts of the county that go to university, because we have some of the coldest higher education participation cold spots in the country in the southwest England. If we look at the number of people who say that they'd be interested in science, the number of people who aspire to go to university, and the number of people in each school year, then you're actually talking about a handful that would be progressing to any one particular science subject post 18. So there's no real sense or long-term merit in competing for a relatively small number of people, although it can be really rewarding and really good to help them understand their options and nurture their existing aspirations. But what I was keen to try and do was to try and do more intervention at an earlier age group. So this is actually my daughter, and she's decided, despite I think having fairly high science capital, that she is going to do a degree in musical theatre. But I know the creativity of the scientific approach is going to help her when she goes on to do that. So I enjoy blowing things up and trying to do activities that are fun, but had never really reflected on the evidence base behind what we were doing in terms of science outreach. And then Louise and her team published the first Aspires report that she's mentioned. So I think it's now 12 years ago. And it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, really, and it really kind of encouraged me to stop and reflect on what we were doing. So in that first report, year 9 students were asked what sort of course they could see themselves, or what sort of job they could see themselves doing, and you had kind of close to 60% would be agreeing that they would like to work in business, and then you had something like 36% agreeing that they'd like to be a celebrity, and a much lower response rate for scientist down at the end. And these are taken from that first Aspires report. So Louise has already given a bit of an update as you go through the age group, but that kind of disconnect between people thinking that science is interest, and their parents thinking that science is important and that scientists make a difference in the world, but a relatively small proportion would actually then aspire to be a scientist. And there were some key recommendations from that report that kind of encouraged me to think less about one-off events, as fun as they are, and we still do them, and more about how we can fund and implement things that are a bit longer term. And so what we did is we designed an intervention, and we trialled it in 2 Cornish primary schools, one in a relatively affluent region, and one that was the largest primary school in Cornwall, and drew from a much broader demographic. So we repeated the same intervention 3 times with year 5 pupils, and we were trying to learn some of the lessons from Aspires. And what we did is in the first session, we asked the kids to name all of the different types of science and scientists that they could think of, and we got them to do a show of hands to say how many would be interested in being a scientist. And then we introduced them over the next 6 weeks, just for an hour a week, to a different STEM ambassador who was able to come in and run a session. So we had a soil scientist come and do a session. We had a zoologist, a renewable energy engineer, and a physicist, and they weren't told that they had to make the sessions as fun and exciting as possible. That would be a bonus, but the only real learning outcome that the kids were needing to achieve was an understanding of what it is like to work in that sector. And then we gave the kids a lens through which to experience that. So we asked them to think in a small group about a problem that's particularly important to them. So we had kids thinking about global warming and marine pollution. We had some kids thinking about terrorism. And then what they had to do in each week was to speak to the STEM ambassador that came in and talk to them about how their particular area of study might help them with their problem. So we ran that activity over a period of 6 weeks. We got the kids to reflect on what they were doing, and then acknowledging kind of some of the research from Aspires that talks about building science capital with children and parents and their communities. We got the kids to present poster presentations at the end of the school day, at the end of the 6 weeks, and we invited the scientists back, and we invited their parents in, and so they were all talking about how particular types of science or scientists can help us with some of the big problems that we face. It's one of the most rewarding things I've ever been engaged with, I think, and it was kind of in addition to the day job. And Louis here was just a really good example. At the beginning, kids were able to say that they might have known about a paleontologist, they might have known about a doctor, they might have known about an astronaut, but Louis decided that he wanted to be a biomimetic engineer, and kind of take inspiration from nature to design systems. I don't know what he's doing now. I did bump into him in secondary school a few years later, and he still remembered it, and he was still very keen. But I do know that he saved the life of 2 people last year from drowning off our local beach as a lifeguard. So he's turning out pretty well, I think. So that was kind of an intervention that we did in different primary schools in Cornwall. And then after that point, I moved to the Eden Project, where we were establishing a campus for delivering higher education, which is in one of the coldest spots of HE in the country. And we realised that Eden only functions because of the constructed soils that we use to establish the biomes. And with some partnership working with the University of Plymouth and Interreg funding, we were able to put in some soils interpretation, both in the Eden project and up the road at the Lost Gardens of Heligan. And so there are kind of between 600,000 and 1 million visitors to the Eden project in a year. So that was an opportunity of getting some soil information in front of quite a broad audience for that kind of incidental learning. And then we also did some sessions where school kids would come to the Eden project, and we would get them to do things like hand texturing and making a little soil people with an unfortunate worm that happened to be in that sample. And then we partnered with the Eden Project and Anglia Ruskin University to deliver some activities at the British Science Festival that year was held in Chelmsford. And the way we did that was to get our students to produce some interpretation around different sorts of plants and their medicinal properties, or something about their ethnobotany and cultural uses. And then with a bit of planning, we were able to establish a wildflower meadow on the campus in Chelmsford and put the interpretation around so that anyone walking through the campus would be able to look at the plants and then learn about the medicines that come from them. And there's a medical school there as well, so the students were quite interested in seeing where some of their medicines were coming from too. And then around the soils, we've support from BS Cubed. We were able to run some soil science themed activities over a couple of days at a family science festival, and that was based around kind of hands-on constructing soils from the different materials, and then sowing some wildflower seeds and having a mini meadow to take home. So that's a sort of activity that the outreach committee gets involved with. So the outreach committee functions to support our members to make sure that there are materials that can be used to deliver outreach and public awareness type events. We function to make soil science outreach inclusive, and we focus mainly up to level 3, so through providing teaching materials and support to primary and secondary schools. We provide information and resources and support training for non-academic stakeholder groups, so farmers, agronomists, land managers and industry, with the aim of trying to work with stakeholders and partners to inspire future generations of soil scientists. We promote public engagement with soils, and we provide educational information to board and council of the British Society of Soil Science to help deliver strategic priorities. So the types of things and events that the outreach committee gets involved with and goes to would be things like Open Farm Sunday, agricultural shows, groundswell. We ran soil activities at the World Congress of Soil Science in Glasgow a couple of years ago, and we also produce this and promote the use of a soil science loan box. So this is a kit that teachers can order and pay a £50 deposit, which is refunded when they return the loan box, and it contains lesson plans and posters and all of the kit and resources that they need to be able to deliver hands-on soil science lessons, either in school or with community groups, things like the Brownies, for example. So soil science loan boxes have been really, really popular, and if you're interested in borrowing one of those, just Google BS Cubed and soil science loan box, and you've got all of the information there on how to use them. And we also get involved in events. So this was the British Science Festival last September, which was held at the University of East London. So it's a really good opportunity to engage with pupils from that area and talk about the importance of soils. So thinking both with a BS Cubed and with a SciEM hat on, we have a skills and capacity crisis within ecology and environmental management and within soil science. They're critical skills shortage areas, and we have a lack of people entering that profession, and we have a lack of more experienced people within that sector as well. So some problems that we have are an inequality of opportunity. There are too few skilled practitioners, and the impact of that is that nature is not recovering in the way that we need nature to recover, and that has negative impacts on our own well-being and on society. And there are a number of barriers that prevent people from getting into good careers in soil science and ecology and environmental management. And some of those are things that Louise mentioned and can potentially be addressed through outreach. So we have exclusionary barriers that apply. So there's an L on here because the ability to run your own car, be able to pay for your own car, to travel to field sites, to do volunteer work is a barrier behind people getting into the ecology and environmental management sector, for example. And so what we want to try and do really is to look at how we can overcome those barriers to achieve more better equity of access. And so some of the things that we're involved with are around creating new routes into the profession, so broadening options post 16 and post 18. So both the British Society for Soil Science and SIAM have been involved in the natural history GCSE, which is now back on the agenda as of last week. And we've also worked to develop apprenticeship routes into the sector too, because the sector has been largely dominated by graduates, and there are barriers to people entering the sector through that way. So for soil science, we now have a master's apprenticeship, and in ecology, we have a master's apprenticeship, but we're also in the process of writing a first year degree level apprenticeship, a level 4 apprenticeship. And the other thing that we then want to try and do is to reflect on our outreach and to try and acknowledge the evidence base better behind what we're doing. So at SIAM, one thing that we're doing with that in mind is our Green Jobs for Nature campaign. So Green Jobs for Nature is a website that doesn't carry our SIAM branding because we want it to be a kind of neutral space where partners are happy to contribute content. And the website is one part of a bigger campaign which we're able to do with funding from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation and also from employers within our sector, our ED&I partners. So we have a Green Jobs for Nature steering group and an ED&I steering group. And what Green Jobs for Nature is doing is working with role models, working with ambassadors and influencers that represent groups who are underrepresented in the sector. And a big part of what we do, we attend careers fairs and events, as you can see with colleagues in the pictures, but we also produce resources that can be used in teaching by careers advisors, by teachers, but also by people who are career changers and they're thinking about how they might want to get into the sector. So we now have more than 200 role profiles submitted by people working in different parts of the sector, and they are honest role profiles. It tells people how much they earn, of what they dislike about their job, as well as what they do like about their job, and then gives people hints and tips on how to get into that career. And then we produce some fantastic teaching resources that have been developed by my colleagues, including Swift Street, so a resource pack for inspiring students in secondary school to explore careers in the green sector. And we have a series of video stories and blog posts. And I'll kind of finish with a couple of call to actions or things to think about if you do have the capacity. So one is we don't have enough soil related profiles on our Green Jobs for Nature website. So we're not actually taking profiles from other parts of the sector at the moment because we've got enough, and it's more important to think about how we use them effectively now. But if you're working in a soils role and you'd like to tell other people about what you do, then please scan the QR code or Google Green Jobs for Nature, and you'll be able to submit a role profile, and then we might contact you to do a video or a blog post as well. And then the other thing that you might want to think about doing is engaging with BS Cubed's outreach committee, because we do have at least one vacancy, I think, on the committee at the moment. So if that's something that you're interested in, then please do get in touch. And I think that's me. So thank you very much, and I'll try and stop sharing.
Thanks, Mark. I guess yeah, it's time for questions now. So feel free to send your questions by typing them in the submit a question box. I guess I can start with a couple of questions that I have as my privilege as a chair. Louise, you've been working with different countries, right? What's been your experience in terms of attitudes of um, school kids in different countries with different cultures? Was there anything that you've learned from that, and also maybe um, the different policies that come from the top, right, in terms of governmental actions? How do they impact that as well?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I mean every context, every international context is different, but I think we've also been struck by how many similarities there are. So we're working in sort of global north and global south countries, and although there are very different economic and political contexts, actually these issues of underrepresentation in science and STEM are common, and this idea of the culture feeling, this high interest but feeling blocked in different ways from continuing it, I think is common in that way.
Yeah. There is a question for you as well in the comments section. How has engagement with STEM changed over time? Are things improving or getting worse? And I had a similar question actually. The Aspire survey was done in 2013, right? Do you have a comparison of that earlier or later on, more recent?
Yeah, so I think the looking at the most recent surveys that people have done in England, which is obviously not everywhere, but in England, I think it's really worrying that it's getting worse. So in 2023, there was the international TIMS data, trends in maths and science, and that showed that actually kids in England are doing well in terms of attaining well in science. I mean, you have to take all international assessments with a little bit of a pinch of salt, but generally we're teaching kids quite well how to understand and do science. But in the same year, the Science Education Tracker that has been published by the Royal Society showed that engagement, particularly among the 11 to 14, the slightly younger children, has gone down compared to previous years. So I think we're concerned that maybe we're good at teaching the content, but we're not so good at the engaging. And actually, those young people are showing declines in aspirations to continue science, less confidence in their science abilities, and there's a growing gender gap as well, which again is a big surprise because we've been working so long to try and fix these things. So I think I would say it's concerning, and against the bigger backdrop of some big companies pulling out of the EDI space, it's a little pessimistic at the moment. And I think it just underlines the absolute importance of doing this sort of outreach work and the sorts of things Mark was talking about, that if we don't do this, it's not going to improve, and it may not even just stay the same.
Yeah, that brings me nicely to a question I had for Mark. How are we doing in terms of outreach? Um, special Our focus here is on school kids, right? Are we doing okay? What's been your experience? What needs to change?
Um, I mean, I would say that one thing that's really good is that it is a strategic priority both for both professional bodies, to try and build capacity within the sector. And I think that we both recognise that the only way that we're going to do that in the long term is trying to do more outreach, trying to do it in a more effective way. And our outreach and engagement isn't just focusing on school kids, because we're also particularly interested in supporting career changes. A lot of people spending more time outdoors during lockdown and thinking about soils more, thinking about plants more, and trying to kind of capitalize on that interest and support them with roots through. And we also have a big job of work to do in terms of communicating the value of soils and the importance of ecology more broadly within society and within policy. There is only so much that we can do. So, as professional bodies, there are a lot of other things that we're trying to achieve as well. But it's really nice that we do recognise that as being a strategic priority. But I think it's really important to work with partners, and both in terms of reaching underrepresented groups. There are really good opportunities to work with partners who already work with those groups, but also our employers that we work with. They want more people coming into that. They want more people applying for their jobs in soil science consultancy or an ecological consultancy. In my experience within our sector, a lot of those organisations remain committed to ED&I type work. We are the second least diverse sector after agriculture in ecology, environmental management, and soil science. And I don't think it's difficult to find partners to work with who kind of share our aspirations, because I don't think we can achieve it alone as professional bodies, but we've got really good links through into our membership. So I think a really important role is providing resources to make it easier for people to go out and share their passion and feel supported.
Yeah. Louise, there's a question from Laurie of the people who ultimately join or want to join STEM careers. Do you know if their parents were also in STEM careers? And if not, was there anything about the careers that made them attractive to that small cohort? And you talked about capital and field as well, right? Which was
Yeah.
highly relevant to this question.
Yeah, so there was a very strong relationship. So a key form of science capital is having parents or carers who have STEM qualifications and work in STEM careers. So yes, among those who went into STEM, it was there's a strong, significant relationship there, which again, I think for us underlines the importance of how do we share STEM capital more broadly with people who don't have that privilege and that resource already. And I think also on that question, there's a question around what age should we be intervening, and I think again the hard answer is it's got to be all the way through. And to use a very probably an inappropriate analogy, if you think of the seed growing in soil, you need a strong start, but you need to keep looking after it the whole way through, and there are different things we need to help with the whole way through. So I think it's again getting that wraparound over time is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I had no idea how a scientist, like I'd never met a scientist. So, these stereotypes that exist is the only thing that's there. Um, Mark, do you have anything to add in terms of what age groups to prioritize?
I think supporting and nurturing. I really like what Louise just said about seeds. I'm going to nick that, if that's all right, Louise. I think nurturing people as much as we can all the way through, but too much outreach in my experience of trying to get funding to do it and trying to carve out time to do it in the past in further and higher education has been based around short-term competition, driven by the market forces and the fact that you have to compete to survive in those sectors. So we need a more top level kind of strategic approach to what we can do from an earlier level, so that all institutions benefit from having more people going into those sectors rather than just competing for a limited pool of people.
Mm-hmm. Mark, there's a question for you, a technical thing about plants and
Yeah, I
slates.
saw that one. I'm
Yes,
happy to answer that one by email.
yes, yeah. Um, Louise, question for you. Uh, you mentioned briefly about the current political issues, right? Obviously, we know that there is value towards EDI work, and everything that you do about STEM participation. How do we convince the public as a whole, but also specifically, I guess, policymakers or people who have high stakes that this this work matters? How can we change their perception to this?
I think in a way that the perception, I'll try and be brief because I know we're out of time now, but like I think there's a general recognition of the absolute importance of STEM industries. If you look in the industrial strategy, 7 out of 8 of the areas for growth are STEM. So I don't think there's a case to be made there. I think the challenge is making the case for why we need to do it in a new and different way. And I think that for me is the challenging thing, with equity at the heart. And it's also not just for careers, it's for citizenship. I think it's vitally important for active citizens. So yeah, I think we just need to do things in a more effective way.
Yeah, it's quite challenging, right? And yeah. Thank you both of you for your presentation and for answering the questions. And thanks for all the attendees and also the questions. You will find a quick feedback survey when you leave the webinar. If you can take just a couple of minutes to complete that, that would be awesome. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel. And as Mark mentioned, there's the loan box scheme as well. So there's a link in the comments about that. Yeah, there you go. We also wanted to bring to your attention a new overseas travel grant. As part of our charitable aims, we provide a number of grants and awards each year, which promote research and education across soil science disciplines. And yeah, that's the one we have. And to help achieve this, the society is proud to introduce an annual Duke of Gloucester Overseas Collaboration Grant aimed at funding soil-focused research projects and knowledge transfer activities in low to middle income countries. This was supported by the Society over the last 8 years with the His Royal Highness Duke of Gloucester as the patron. So we are excited to announce a new grant to honor his patronage. And this grant will provide an ideal opportunity to highlight the importance of nurturing our soils and collaboration across countries for the benefit of human society. Again, more information in the link provided here. So our next webinar is scheduled for April 9th, and this will be on soil use and management journal as it celebrates its 40th anniversary. It will feature a presentation on a highly cited paper from the journal about phosphorus use efficiency. The more details on that are provided in the BSSS website. I hope to see you at future events. And in the meantime, thank you again. And thanks, Mark, Louise, for presenting, for your time, and for everyone else joining us. Have a good day. Bye all.